I'm Emily Lutzker.
And I'm Anna Kamasia.
This episode was recorded at the beginning of 2026, prior to the US and Israel launching airstrikes in Iran.
Today, International Arrival speaks with Iranian-Canadian transdisciplinary artist Gita Hashemi. Working for nearly 4 decades, Gita's work has consistently been grounded in her revisionary mantra that the personal is poetic, the poetic is political, the political is personal. Her project, Grounding States of Gender, is currently on view at Art Lab at Western University in London, Ontario, Canada, and brings together performance, life narratives, writing, and video. Gita, welcome. It's so lovely to have you on the podcast today. I'm really happy that you agreed to be here, so thank you.
Thank you, Anna. It's been many years since we were in the same space together, and it's a real pleasure for me to be speaking to you in real time.
Full disclosure, Gita and I have known each other for over a decade. We met in Palestine at a conference on art and resistance. And then we worked on Grounding together in 2017 for Open Space Labs, which was a residency series that I curated at Carleton University Art Gallery. So thank you again for agreeing to talk to me. Unfortunately, Emily, who's usually on the podcast, can't be here for this podcast. So it's just you and me today.
International Arrival has been on my podcast list since you started. You and Emily started,
thank you.
What, is it 2 or 3 years ago?
It's now 3 years. We've done 23 podcasts, I think.
Amazing. Yeah. And I've heard all of them. Oh. And I feel it's an honor to be invited to speak with you. And I kind of feel like I'm finally arriving. So
well, I'm just really happy that you agreed to chat with me because it's always a pleasure to talk to you and it's really nice to see you. And it's so funny because I think since COVID, our sense of like liveness and real time has been altered. You know, we spent so much time on Zoom that Zoom now feels like we're actually meeting in person, even
Absolutely.
though we're not.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's cold there and it's cold here. So
yes.
Hopefully we can keep warm as we chat. And there's lots to talk about, but let's start with Grounding. This is a project that started in 2017 as an embodied writing performance that also involved cameras. But perhaps you can talk about the seeds of this project at Carleton. For example, your correspondence with Zara, who stayed in Iran when you left, and maybe the project's connection to gender, to language.
Actually, the idea of the project had formed earlier. It emerged out of the organic conversations that I had with Zara, who is my childhood friend and lives in Iran. When you and I met in the summer of 2016 at Dar Kalima University in Bethlehem, in that amazing conference that was organized by the incomparable Palestinian photographer Rahab Nazal.
Yes.
And our dear friend. I had recently spent some time with Zahra and another friend who sponsored her visa to visit Germany. This was a reunion that was taking place after about 34 years. And it was Zahra's first and to date the only trip out of Iran. So it had taken a lot of legwork to organize the trip. On the one hand, to arrange the German visa for her, and on the other, for her to get a passport and be able to leave Iran, because as some people may know, some of the listeners may know, married women, and Zahra is married women need their husband's permission to get their own passport and leave the country. So I myself had tried twice before, after I got my citizenship in Canada, to arrange a visa for her to come to Canada, but I wasn't successful because she's not my immediate family and I couldn't meet the financial requirements to sponsor her visa. So as you might imagine, in the weeks that we were together, our conversations were really intense. In fact, the whole experience was quite intense. We grew up in the same town and went to the same elementary and high school, and then organized together during the 1978-79 revolution. We helped each other sneak out of our homes to go to protests together. And, after the revolution, we were active in the same political organization for the very short time that there was a semblance of political freedom in Iran. And actually, our host in Germany, Jay, was also a political activist and somebody that we knew from those years. And all three of us, when all three of us were members of the Tashkilat Demokratik Zanan, or Women's Democratic Organization, and we were organizing and canvassing in the same area of Shiraz. And, there we were after some 30 some years, and our life trajectories had been so radically different. Our daily lived experiences had been so different in those years. Yet we were aware of the ways in which all of our lives were marked by our gender as women. When the political crackdowns started in Iran, which was very shortly after the success of the revolution and the establishment of the Islamic Republic of Iran, there were waves of arrests of, one organization after another came under attack, from secular nationalists to Marxist Islamists to communists to various leftist organizations, and the universities were closed for cultural revolution, and our lives were really uprooted. And in those, we separated because Zara got arrested and went to prison, and I went underground, and our friend Jay left Iran right away. And so it took a number of years for us to be reconnected again. And so the idea of grounding came from that period of intense reunification, when we were talking about what our experiences of our lives had been.
Right.
Our friend Jay, who'd gone to Pakistan, and from Pakistan to, East Germany, and then after German reunification had stayed in Berlin and worked and, made a life for herself, and married a German man and had 2 children. And, me, who had arrived from, through some strange routes in Canada, and, Zahra, who had stayed in Iran. And many of the issues that we were talking about when we were working in the Iranian Women's Democratic Organization, when we were in Iran, were still issues that we were dealing with. So the idea of grounding started there. So when you and I met, and you saw some photos of my project, Ephemeral Monument, the writing project, and you invited me to come into that beautiful, amazing, beautiful, huge space with high ceiling at Carleton University Art Gallery. So I wanted to say that without your work, Anna, grounding would have not become possible. And I think it's really important to acknowledge the work of the curators in procuring the institutional support that artists need for some of the artwork to even be created. And I also want to acknowledge the work of Sohela Kolahduz Esfahani, the curator at Art Lab, University of Western Ontario, UWO, who really worked for 2 years to bring this project into that gallery. And, from fundraising and from millions of sources, patching together the funds necessary to making sure that the work had its own space and adequate space and adequate support, technical support. So, yeah, I'm very grateful to both of you.
Thank you. That's kind of you to acknowledge that labor too.
It was, the idea of grounding took shape. Those conversations that we had started in Germany could have a physical manifestation as a work of art. Yeah.
Yeah, it really becomes about life writing, doesn't it? About narrative, about life writing, about gendered experiences. A lot of your work, like Ephemeral Monuments that you mentioned from 2008, and that draws on the literature of resistance in Iran, if I'm correct, between the 1953 coup d'etat and then the 1979 revolution. And so the performance in the subsequent video shows you writing, erasing, and rewriting in chalk. The final layer of writing is a list of names or includes names of political prisoners who are executed in Iran. Most recently, I think you published Rumi Roaming, which is contemporary engagements and interventions in this multidisciplinary and multi-platform anthology, which you curated and edited. And so there's always been this interest in the word. And so perhaps you can talk a little bit about your interest in writing, why the scrolls that you wrote of Zara's life were in Farsi, and why you chose to write in Farsi and not in English, because I think that's important, this idea of not translating and to keep original language. But I also know that you edited that language. So maybe you can talk a little bit about your interest in writing, first of all, and language, and then maybe specifically about grounding.
Sure. You're right. A lot of my work is language-based, and I frequently draw on or engage with literature in one way or another. Perhaps because reading was and has been my window to the world, to use a much-used metaphor. And poetry is probably in the very blood of every Iranian, because we grow up with it in our daily lives because our cultural values are often communicated in lines of poetry taken from, the many famous and highly revered classical poets. And even our contemporary revolutionary ideas are also encapsulated in poetry first and foremost.
Right.
By, some amazing contemporary poets. And the calligraphy as the practice of writing as a visual art is also a highly revered art, which we start practicing in school. It's an art form that we see around us in the architecture and in poetry books, prayer books, and even in jewelry and fashion and on ceramics and even on cutlery, right? So while I was training in visual arts in university in Tehran, I was also receiving training at the Iranian Calligraphers Institute in the styles of Nastaliq, which is the style used in grounding, and Shekaste, which is a more whimsical and lyrical style of writing, both of which are distinctly Persian styles, as opposed to Sols and Nasr styles, which are shared with Arabic calligraphy. So calligraphy has been part of my visual training as much as,
Right.
that connection to the word. I see calligraphy as a visual practice, a visual art practice. And of course we see calligraphy everywhere, as I said. But as a contemporary artist, I'm also interested in other media and approaches. And so I'm actually more than interested in other media and approaches. I think I'm compelled to experiment with other forms and techniques and technologies because, as a friend sometimes tells me, I may have undiagnosed attention deficit because I keep changing. I keep changing not just the specific focus of my, and content of my projects, but how I make them. But I think it is because I find that I need to, with every project, I find that I need to relearn how I make art in order to get at what actually the project demands.
Right. And I hear this from a lot of artists who are interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary, is that, they have an idea, but it needs the right form.
Yes, exactly.
And so it's about exploration of form as much as it is about ideas.
Absolutely. Yes, totally.
And just speaking about form, I realized that we haven't really described what grounding is for our listeners. So when it was at Carleton, you had a camera taped to your chest and a camera above, and you had these scrolls on the ground that you transcribed Zara's life story onto these scrolls. And then as you finished the scrolls, at the end of the day, we would put them up on the wall so that by the end of the week, you were surrounded by the scrolls. And for this project at Art Lab, you are projecting the video, if I understand correctly. You're projecting the video that we took of you creating the scroll. So it's projected like a carpet, like a screen onto the floor, and then the scrolls are already on the wall, so you're immersed. So something that I thought was really important to the project was people came, they watched you writing, and the labor that goes into that too, right?
Yeah.
That was a lot of hard work on the ground, writing these scrolls day after day.
Yes.
And then to sit at this table and to have conversations with you, with me, with the other people who worked at QAG. And what happened was really beautiful. I don't think we could have planned it, was that people shared so much about their own experiences in Iran, in Canada, as women, in terms of sexual violence, because I know that's also discussed in your story of Zara.
Thank you for that comprehensive description. Two things to add is that there were actually 3 cameras. There was the camera, there was also the live stream camera that we were using, which was different from because at when this piece was made, the GoPro cameras, which we were using for the recording purpose, we couldn't live stream from them. And so we had a separate camera, a webcam, live streaming. And we spent, the first 3 days just positioning the cameras and the scrolls in relationship to the cameras. And that was quite laborious.
But thankfully, we had those amazing technicians and installers.
Absolutely. Without whom the project wouldn't have happened, right? Yeah. And I'm going to add the second thing I wanted to add, and that is that you, in fact, are in the video that is now being projected as well, because part of the labor of the production was in laying down the lines, the graphite lines, which I used as guide as I was writing with brush and ink. So the third thing is that what we had at the table at QAG and now in the subsequent installations of grounding, it's become part of the work. Is this table where people can sit quietly and read translations of the text that's written on the scrolls.
Right.
And in QAG, we also had tea for them, and we had some facilitated conversations, and we've kept elements of that in there. Think of it as a scriptorium. It's a place for production of text and for production of writing, and also for reading, for engagement, for quiet, focused engagement with writing. And so that table, that low table, has that function. The function of the scrolls was they harken back to medieval manuscripts that people might be familiar with. Maybe the kind of art that you see in museums, pages from classical poetry or epic poetry that are written on parchment. And they are tightly designed, they're penned and decorated and maybe even illustrated, but they're fairly small and portable, but the content of which is mostly, as I said, it could be epic or lyrical poetry, or could be sacred text, it could be, the Quranic text, or even scientific writing. But the form is more or less the same. think about the book the way we think of a book right now. We associate a particular aesthetic to book production. The tradition of the manuscript production, which also continued partially into when the printing came to Iran, into the lithographic books. The formal elements, I wanted to gesture to this formal and historical production, but bring into it something that's been absent from it, which is the daily lives of women and, the language of the everyday.
Yes.
So what I did was I maintained that kind of long columnar composition of a page. Usually it's 2 columns or 4 columns, depending on, what they're writing. I've maintained, and the scrolls create that sort of long columns, but bring into it, I bring into it a woman's life narrative and her reflection on her life experiences in, colloquial and everyday language, which you don't see in Persian calligraphy. And, each genre has its own kind of character and focus, but what you don't see in it is women and women's presence and life stories and particularly, if women appear, and women do appear in epic poetry and in lyrical and love poetry, but they're either objects of love of some, male protagonists, or, they're distractions of the male protagonists, right? But we don't hear from women themselves, right? So I took the form, blew it up, like scaled it up to something that absolutely could not be ignored. Maybe just to make up for, hundreds of years of absence. And I think that transmission, that public and simultaneous transmission, was also intended to make that public mark, right? This is something that you cannot ignore. You can't put it in some, library or in some, chest of drawers and hide it, and, or hide it in private spaces and in hushed conversations. These are issues that we need as a society, we as women need to talk about publicly, and as a society we need to face, and we need to have public conversations about. And, it's interesting because grounding, in a way, anticipated the Me Too movement.
Yeah.
Right. It predates the start of the Me Too movement by, several months. So, so the intention of, transmission was to transmit. But then the question becomes, why in Persian? Why in Farsi? Because, comparatively, so few people read Farsi. But for me, as an artist who works with language, it's become, as I've matured in my practice, it's become more important to respect the language in which the culture is produced. And so I'm talking about the life of an Iranian woman. And I didn't want to make that life as something that the, Western audience can easily consume. It wasn't an object of consumption. That project, yes, it was produced in, an English-speaking context, but it wasn't really meant primarily for an English-speaking audience, either for their, enlightenment or pleasure or learning. It was something that first and foremost was being produced as something that Zahra and I, as Iranian women, representing our generation and representing our women needed to talk about. And yeah.
I was just going to say, maybe you can just give a sort of brief overview of what kinds of narratives are, or what sort of thematics are in the narrative. Because I know she talks about, you, as you said, she went to jail after the revolution.
Right. Zahra and I had started working on these writing fragments about, experience of memories of childhood and experiences of different periods of life, different phases of life. And we talked about it, on the phone, and, she did writing and sent them to me. And then I would, give feedback and send it back to her, and, ask her to expand on something, and, add something, etc. And so there was a real collaborative process that was happening here as she was writing. It's her story.
Yes.
All of it is her story. I think I was acting as the facilitator here, and then when I was in the gallery, I was acting as the scribe, really.
Right, the conduit, yeah.
Exactly. So she talks about, from early childhood, how what she remembers about being a girl, specifically how being a girl, being a female was, um, uh, how it was constructed for her, what that meant for her mother, what that meant for the society around her.
Yes.
And once marked as a woman, what did that mean in terms of whether she could play, in the alley with boys or not, or whether, what kind of clothing could she wear as a girl, and what kind of school did she go to. And then, she also talks about some really difficult experiences, which many women, not just in Iran, I think it's really important to remember that these experiences are not, even though this particular story is about a woman or the life of a woman in Iran, these are not experiences that are limited to Iranian women. Gender construction is a process of socialization everywhere. And so she also talks about the kind of violence that she has experienced, from rape to molestation to, sexual repression. And so she gets into some really difficult subjects. And I think when we were working together, part of my work was to ensure that remembering and talking about these traumatic events do not re-traumatize her. And so the process of working through, the conversations had to also attend to the emotional layers that came in. As in fact, the process of writing became, as I switch between, the scrolls are mostly written in black ink, and in some areas I'm using red ink, because the red marks those passages where I'm reacting, I'm having some kind of emotional or intellectual reaction to what I'm writing. So, the work had to be attentive both before QAG and during the performance, and while we were having those conversations with the, young students who were coming to the gallery and seeing the performance live and having tea around that table and reading the translations and talking about their own experiences, we needed to be attentive to those kind of emotional
Absolutely.
dimensions, right?
I think that's just so important when particularly as artwork delves into injustices, whether that be psychological, physical, to trauma. I think that we have to be so careful about how we are responding to those people who are responding to the work.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that kind of brings me to now, which is, we've been watching, for the most part, we've been watching what's been happening in Iran through the demonstrations that have been going on for 3 weeks now. I mean, it's very difficult to find out what's going on at this moment. I tried to look for sort of updates today and found that there was not a lot to be found. And so I feel like this work is particularly potent at this moment, thinking about gender, thinking about equality, thinking about democracy, what that really means, what that really looks like. And I wondered, you said that you had just talked to her, and that might be too personal a question to ask what she is seeing and doing, or perhaps more broadly, kind of do you see parallels between grounding or connections between grounding and what we have been witnessing in Iran now at this moment?
Thank you for that question. Obviously, what is happening now in Iran is, in the forefront in my mind.
Yeah.
In fact, the last conversation that I had with Zahra was on the day that we opened the exhibition at UWO at the Art Lab. We had a video conversation and I showed her the installation and the video projection, and we had a brief chat. And then the internet got cut the same day. I'm really glad that I had that conversation with her. And then we had no contact again until a few days ago. The internet is still cut off in Iran, and the communication with the outside is only through the phone lines, but they can call out. We cannot call them. So,
Yeah.
so they cannot receive a call from outside Iran. They have these, some company has a package for people to call out only. So, in these harried conversations that we have, we mostly talk about the practical stuff in terms of, how I might be able to support her, or, whether she has managed to reach my family and, other people that we know, and what we can do practically to support her, including sending money to Iran, which is quite a challenge because of the sanctions, economic sanctions. You have to find these circuitous routes to send money to people in Iran. And of course, right now, money is really with the economic situation, because of the inflation, because of the radical drop in the price of the currency, in the value of the Iranian currency, prices have gone up, and people, even the middle class, are in dire strait, and and obtaining the necessities, the daily necessities, is a challenge for everybody. So many of us who are outside Iran and have family there or friends there are trying to get money to them. And so usually conversations circulate around that.
Do you see a connection? I mean, obviously there's a connection between grounding, states of gender,
Right.
and
Gotcha.
women, life, freedom from 2022. But
Right.
do you
Yeah.
see connections between grounding and what's happening in Iran, as we know, what we know of what's happening
Right.
in Iran right now? Do you think that there are connections to be made?
Yeah, I thank you for that question. I think the connection between grounding and woman, life, freedom movement of the 2022 is fairly obvious. But I think this work at a deeper level is connected to what is happening now in Iran, and in fact what has been happening since 1979, because this is not the first uprising. This is not the first time that people are taking to the street and protesting. What is the connection is the general ethos of unrest and struggle, and the demand for the right to a better life, which characterizes not only the recent protests, but all of the uprisings that we have seen since 1979 and since the establishment of the Islamic theocratic government And so I think it's really important for people who don't know this history. It's really important to remember that the first oppressive act of the Islamic Republic was against women. And, less than a month after the success of the revolution, Khomeini demanded that the transitional government ban unveiled women from entering into government spaces. And that very shortly turned into a mandatory veiling enforced by a morality police, which became institutionalized. And this became part of the daily experience, women's daily experience of their bodies. So, that oppressive act is not independent or separate from all the other forms of oppression that we have seen over the years. So and in fact, women have been at the forefront of a lot of the civil society organizations and a lot of the challenges that have made, legal challenges, social challenges that have been made to the theocratic system, including challenging the very constitution. In 2008, 2009, there was a massive organizing in Iran while everybody was focused on the green movement. The women had been busy massively organizing a challenge to the constitution, to the discriminatory laws that are in the constitution against women, by collecting, it was a campaign called 1 Million Signature Campaign. And they were canvassing, young women, students, women, in neighborhood organizations were going around trying to collect 1 million signature to launch a formal legal challenge to these discriminatory laws. So women have been at the forefront of the challenges that have been made over these decades to the Islamic Republic and Islamic rule. So this, whether it is economic or political, it's that is not separated from the work that women have been doing.
And it so often gets played out on women's bodies, like
Absolutely.
Even here, you look at the United States, them thinking of banning abortion and making rules about who can and can't and what you can wear. I mean, it mirrors in many ways what happened in Iran in 79.
Actually, what I've been telling people is that I think Trump wrote to the clerics in Iran and said, please send me your playbook. Because, almost everything that we are seeing right now, and in fact have been seeing, it's not just Trump. We need to remember that it's really what's happening is not just Trump. It's, the political system in the US has been overtly and covertly doing similar forms of oppression that's now becoming more apparent, more visible, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And they're definitely connected, so
I think so. But it's just, I just find it quite shocking, I guess, that it still gets played out on women's bodies all the time. That's what's controlled. That kind of is like the first step to control is demanding and dictating what can happen to women's bodies, how.
In many ways, what can happen to women's bodies, but also what happens to women's social presence. Okay, remember that the austerity politics, economics, the biggest victims of austerity politics have been women. Single women. Women trying to, get somewhere in their workplace, women trying to live independently, so we as women collectively have lost so much socially, economically, politically, right? So not just the physical body, but also the social body.
But it also goes back, I think, to this idea of public and private. And so bringing the female body into the public sphere I think is a really important thing to note in what you're doing as well. So, like you talked about scale and you talked about grounding the body in some ways, but I
Yeah.
also think it's about this public-private reading, which is very private, all of a sudden becomes public when you share it in this gallery and you're all reading at the same time and you're responding to the reading. And so I think there's something there too about this kind of disappearance of women socially
Mhm.
outside, and they're like relegated to domestic spaces from what I understand. And so you have them, you are like bringing them back out of the domestic spaces into the public sphere again, which I think is important and an important distinction to make.
Absolutely. I think, in terms of the physical body, one of the things that I did in Ephemeral Monument, which you talked about briefly, and we see in grounding also, is placing my own body in the writing.
Yes.
And that has been really important to me. My body as a symbolic presence of that physical body.
Yes.
Often when we think about feminist work, we think about the sexualized and naked body. Here I am, in full dress as a laboring body, a
Yes.
working body, a body that is at work.
And a
right?
writing body, right?
At a writing body.
Yes.
Exactly, right? So I think that's been really important to me. And in fact, it keeps coming up in the performance work that I've done. I need to open a parenthesis here and say, just so that we don't reinforce stereotypes, that yes, there was the push by the Islamic government to push women into domestic spaces, and Iranian women never accepted that. So in spite of that, Iranian women have been pushing back, consistently pushing back. They have a social and economic presence in spite of all the challenges, in spite of all the limitations.
Okay.
Right? So, I mean, think about, for example, someone like Shirin Ebadi or someone like Nasrin Sotoudeh, or, Iranian women were pushed out of the judicial system as judges, but they have been lawyers and they have been fighting for other women and for the rights of women. They're academics and they're doctors and they're everywhere and they're working. So I don't want to make the impression that the limitations on Iranian women are as severe as they are in Afghanistan, for example, or as in Saudi Arabia. But and the reason that they're not as limited is because they've been fighting back in all these years. That's the other part of it that's really important. And I think in grounding, what we see as we read Zahra's narrative is not just, the kind of constraints that she has experienced and she's had to contend with, but also how she has had agency and has exerted her own power and negotiated those limitations and found a way of having a social presence that is, in fact, in the area that she's working in, is quite important, nationally important. So what I experienced here with regards to this particular piece was whether, because the narrative is so explicit and so open about very intimate issues, intimate experiences, the question that I had to deal with Zahra was, what if people were to read the narrative and recognize who she is? Okay.
Right.
And whether that is going to endanger her because she's still living in Iran. And B, what kind of implications might that have for her as someone who has a social presence,
Right.
who has a professional presence. But in the end, it goes back to, what the current collective space can tolerate and can allow and can sustain and support, and also the individual courage and capacity that each of us have for risk taking.
And that sort of brings me to one of my last questions, I guess, and that's that you recently wrote an open letter to Canadians of conscience about what's going on in Iran at the moment and what we can do to help. And you write, quote, "The protests that began on December 28th have brought to the streets a broad cross-section of people calling for economic justice and political change, demanding dignity and freedom. Witnessing from afar the brutal and murderous suppression of protesters by the government of the Islamic Republic, many of us outside Iran are compelled to raise our voices in support of the protests." End of quote. So I wondered if you could talk a little more about that. Like, in your opinion, what are the stakes here and what can we do as people living outside of Iran?
Mm-hmm.
And these days it's hard to have access to information and to know like where the information is coming from, who's providing that information. I mean, that has been a challenge for everything at this current moment, but particularly at a moment where they don't have the internet.
Right.
Well,
there are two sides to that. There is the fact that there is no internet, so the news doesn't come out of Iran or trickles out of Iran.
Yes.
And a lot of it is not independently verified, and so it's hard to know what is exactly happening. So we saw very traumatizing images of this courtyard of a coroner's office, coroner's building full of body bags piled on top of one another, which has been really traumatizing for many of us, who've had these experiences, have lost family, or have seen these kind of images before. And so the figures that are being thrown around are widely different, from 2000, that more or less 2000 that the government itself has acknowledged, to up to 20,000, which we are hearing from some diasporic media, Western media. So it's really hard for us to know what is actually going on and what the toll has been.
Yes.
But definitely, everybody says it's been unprecedented. Unprecedented seems to be the key word, the code word for the kind of time that we're living right now everywhere.
Yes.
So apparently it's been unprecedented. And so, but I think it's going to take a while for the right figures to come out. And what we know, if they come out, because we still don't know how many people the government killed in the mass executions in the 1980s, mid to late 1980s, when, they just did these very summary trials and executions of masses of political activists that they were holding in prisons. So we still don't know the numbers, but I think the numbers don't matter as much. They matter, but they don't matter. We can't focus only on the numbers. We need to focus on the experience of oppression and the machinery of oppression. And this is what, people need to remember, is that the same machinery that is presumably fighting Israel or matters in, the fight against Israel and the US in the region, that same machinery is being used against Iranians in Iran.
Yes.
That same military machinery is being used against Iranians. And that matters a lot as we think about how do we address what is happening? How do we address these events?
Exactly. And do you think, I mean, we just don't know at this point, right? Like, I mean, we don't know what is going down on the ground in Iran at this very moment. We don't know how much is being manipulated by America, by Israel.
Well, from what we hear, from what we see and we hear, is that the protests have been suppressed. Okay, so
Yeah.
there are no daily protests happening in Iran,
No.
right? Or there may be. I have to correct myself here and say that most of the news that we've been getting are from central, northern, and northern Iran. And so, Kurdistan, with its long history of resistance against the government, militant resistance against the government, Baluchistan, with its long history of ethnic organizing and also ethnic suppression by the government. There may be organizing happening there and protests happening there that we don't know about.
Yes.
And so, it's really important to demand the flow of information and independent investigations. And I think there is an attempt for the government to make the situation as normal as possible. What we do know and we should be prepared for is that, the government, there is only, like, by all accounts, there is only 10 to 20% of Iranians that support the government. And many of these are people who are directly connected to the machinery of the government or the Revolutionary Guards and their various kind of organizations, connected organizations. And this 10 to 20% have been ruling, undemocratically for, this past 47 years. And they have no legitimacy for the majority of Iranian people. So we have seen the frequency of the uprisings increase in the past, 15, 20 years. And I think we need to anticipate yet another uprising. People are going to come to the streets again. How are we prepared to support them? What kind of discourse can we create around that in support of that here?
Yeah.
And how do we resist foreign intervention? Because this is not the first time the threats that we are hearing from Trump and Netanyahu. It's actually, there is historical precedent of for this intervention in 20th century Iranian history, So we need to be really vigilant about that. And this is the work that we need to do now.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have a response to that. I'm just like, yeah, it is.
No, it
It's
is.
really like,
Yeah, it is.
I feel like we all have to stand up, not just for Iran, but for the world at this moment.
We have to understand that what is happening in Iran is part of this broader
Global
experience.
Yes.
It has its own specificity, but it's part of this global experience. And we need solidarity means unquestioned, unequivocal stance against machinery of oppression, wherever it is, wherever it is,
Yes.
and whatever shape it takes,
Right.
whatever the ideological facade of it.
Exactly. We are not free until we are all free.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we are standing against the ICE in Minnesota, we have to stand against the Revolutionary Guards in Iran.
Exactly. Exactly.
The other side of it is the propagandistic Western media that's been heavily at work and putting out all kinds of fake news, all kinds of propaganda in support of some, fake leader of Iran, the son of the former Shah of Iran.
Right.
That they're trying to push as as an alternative, right? And so the entire kind of pro-Israel and MAGA machinery has been at work.
Just to be clear, that's Reza Pahlavi that we're talking about?
That's Reza Pahlavi that we're talking about, yes. So, the uncertain environment in terms of information is because on the one hand, there is the lack, and on the other hand, there is too much propaganda.
But
Right?
it's being conducted by the Trump Netanyahus of the world.
Absolutely orchestrated, right?
Yes, orchestrated.
Totally,
exactly.
completely orchestrated by them. And then, in the middle are all these voices with different degrees of connection and different levels of information, etc. And
Yes.
people are talking as experts, and I don't want to replicate that. So first and foremost, I want to say that I'm not speaking as a political commentator here, and my
Yes.
letter was not meant to be a political commentary on the current situation. My letter was meant to be an intervention in a political space where I don't have much expectations from the political right. Okay, political right does what it does. But my intervention was geared specifically for the political left, that some parts of it just stays at the rhetoric, at the level of the rhetoric of human rights when it comes to speaking about what is happening in Iran, putting Iran as part of the axis of resistance, and which has been important since the beginning of the Israeli genocide in Gaza, and considers Iran an anti-imperialist force, and because of its support for Palestinian resistance, doesn't want to criticize the oppression in Iran, right? And so I wanted to just say, as someone who, has a direct experience of the history, the beginning, the origin of the Islamic Republic,
Yes.
and has paid for it with my life and everything that I've experienced and my family has experienced. And also as someone who is active and part of the progressive movements here in Toronto, in Canada, that it is possible to condemn what the Islamic Republic is doing to people, what the theocratic system is doing to Iranian people, and support Iranian people's legitimate right and legitimate demands to determine their own life and political system. And it is also possible to reject interventions by, as we have been hearing, the threats of intervention by Trump and Netanyahu.
The parallels are extreme, again, between what's happening in Iran right now and what's happening in the US.
Right. And it is our responsibility to not limit. First of all, it's our responsibility as people who are living in the West to not even allow ourselves to think that we are saviors in relationship to Iranians. Okay. Iranians don't need, some white Western saviors, right? To go and, save them from, some draconian regime. Iranians have been doing that, they've been fighting, they've been struggling, they've been creating their own systems and their own alternative organizing and their own alternative cultures and their own resistant movements and their own leadership in all of the past, almost 50 years.
Yeah.
They don't need us. Okay. What they need us to do is to be aware and work against the possibility of the threats of foreign intervention.
Yes.
As we have seen in Venezuela, right? As we've seen in so many places. And the kind of warmongering that Israel has been doing in relationship to pretty much everywhere in the region.
Yes.
Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Jordan, Yemen, and like you name it, right? So it's important for us to be vigilant about that, right? And where we have influence is how we hold our governments to account, and how we build a political discourse around what anti-imperialism and solidarity actually really means.
Can I just ask you what's next for you?
I am working on an expanded book titled Fugitive Transmissions.
Oh, nice title.
Thank you. Tales of Enduring Transience. And it is a book that, it's an expanded book. Expanded book is a term that I'm using to refer to the kind of book that Rumi Roaming was, with, this multidisciplinary, multi-platform book that includes a print volume, but also, in real life events and performances, and also online media, and, have different, has images and videos and, different work from different disciplines. And Fugitive Transmissions is going to focus on the experiences of forced migration and precarious settlement. So it starts from my own experience, but it's not a memoir. It's a series of vignettes that focus on specific experiences and make connections to, or I try to make connections to, broader experiences, broader collective experiences. And it's coming out in 2027. So I'm trying to get back into the write. I stopped writing as the protest started, and I've been, distracted because of that, but I'm trying to get back into that writing. Yeah.
Sounds beautiful. I look forward to reading it.
And making, not just writing, making. It's a series of videos and audio. I'm interviewing.
It sounds like quite a large project too.
It is a large project. Yeah.
Well, good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming to talk to me today. It's a pleasure to talk to you always. So thank you.
I really appreciate the work that you've been doing in International Arrivals. It's really important to open that space to talk about, our experiences in, meaningful ways.
Obviously, I think so too. And I think, it goes beyond just, what's your immigration story, to what are the real issues here.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I think that whether that's gender or revolution or the way that we receive news, or, all of those things are important. So thank you.
Right. And also the impact that people who are coming from these experiences are having in the way that the culture is taking shape here. I think it's important that the space that you're opening is more than that tokenistic space. So, people remember, when there is a protest, people remember you. Oh, there is a protest in Iran. Who's the Iranian artist we can reach out to, right? Or there is something happening in Lebanon, and let's talk to a Lebanese artist. But I think what you're doing is you're going beyond that tokenistic engagement and opening, this independent space where we can talk to one another and see what this collective experience is like, and how we can learn from one another.
Exactly. And I think that's all we can hope for, is that we start a conversation. And really, it's about exchange, it's about sharing, it's about realizing that people have overlapping ideas, conflicts, understandings. So thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
And if you want to know more about Gita's work, you can visit her website, gitaha.net, GITAHA.net.
Please take a moment to hit the like button, rate us, and review the show. It makes a big difference in helping us reach more listeners.
Your tax-deductible donations make this podcast possible. Please support us at internationalarrivals.org.